Committee on the Rules Committee of the Whole is back from recess, and I do apologize to those listening that we are a little bit late from the 10 o'clock coming back in. But we have with us this morning from DOE, the Superintendent, Mr. Swanson, and also Mr. Cooper Nurse is here. So we're going to go ahead and get started with questioning, and we'll start with the Oversight Chair of Education, Senator Barnett. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel like everyone in this room is wanting to ask about the school opening plans, but we're talking budget. And Superintendent and Mr. Frank Cooper Nurse, thank you for coming down on such short notice. But I know that we've had a lot of conversation since this substituted version of Bill 26 hit the floor on the agenda. And so I wanted to, I don't know if it'll be Soup or Frank or both of you guys, if you could just give us your run through of this budget proposal and where you think it needs improvement.
Before we get started, I just want to make note that both individuals have been sworn in. Thank you.
I will yield to Frank so that he can give you accurate details. The picture I have is a little bit different, not in outcome, but he knows the understanding of just exactly how the pieces all fit together.
Maybe I'll just give an overview and a quick review of how we looked at the numbers in terms of Bill 26-37 versus our budget submission. Just off the bat, when we came down here a few weeks ago and we were defending our budget, the original ask was 287. Because of the timeline of implementation, that was submitted absent the GPP implementation, which was an additional 7. So overall, the department was looking in the neighborhood of $295 million. As this bill is in draft form and it's appropriated, the current breakdowns give GDOE $246.9 million, which, again, general fund takes the bulk of the appropriation at 220.7, and then that's left with the special appropriations from the Healthy Futures Funds, the Limited Gaming Fund, and the larger appropriation from the Guam Educational Facility Fund at 11.4 to fund the remaining operations. Obviously, the $295 million ask versus the $246.9 million is going to have a tremendous impact in our fiscal operations because of the shortfall and the inability in years past when we were dealing with appropriations that were lower than what we proposed in our baseline budget. We were able to go to federal funding for support. Right now, we're on continuous contracts with some federal support, but we do understand that ESF is up for expiration in September, and our ARP is up to expire next year in September 2024. So that being said, I think you guys are all aware that when the acting superintendent Judy Wampat was here prior to her departure, a lot of the ARP's funds had been moved and earmarked directly for CIP projects. Well, I'm happy to say that that process is in flow and we're going through that requisition and encumbrance. So a lot of that money and the ability for us to go back to ARP, if there is truly a significant shortfall in our appropriation, is going to be challenging for us. So when we see a budget that's at 246, and I want to note that the school lunch child nutrition meal fund reimbursement at 12.5, that gives us a cushion in the appropriation level, but it never comes with the cash release. So we get it on the appropriation. It's not a cash release. You can take 12.5 off the 246 and apply that to what GDOE has to use in terms of funding support to run the school district, the entire school district. Obviously, there's going to be different avenues where we still have federal support, but for the most part, you're looking at a decrease. It's an increased budget from year to year, but it's a significant decrease from what we need and estimate in terms of baseline absent federal support.
Could we just start there, Frank? And so, right, when you compare last year to this year, there is an increase, but that increase, you guys were short last year, right? So
last year, we were short about $50 million. What we did then was we went for critical contracts and utilities to be funded out of ARP. So we went through USAID, went through the approval process. Thankfully, they allowed us to use those funds directly to support utilities and for critical contracts.
And so, Frank, I guess worst case scenario with this budget untouched the way it is, what would we be looking at for the next fiscal year for the Guam Department of Education?
I think the challenge is always going to, the funding challenge, right? And our agency is different, and you can see you're following the news. The Adequate Education Act puts a lot of pressure and stipulations on how we operate in compliance. Absent appropriate funding levels, we really don't have a shot at meeting all those requirements, as you're seeing with our inspections now. You're seeing with the lawsuits coming out. Funding is a big part of that. I don't want to say it's all related to money, but I do want to say that we have to do our due diligence to properly fund education to make sure that we can address the critical needs of the department, not only in staffing, but the critical contracts for the health and the sanitary and healthy conditions for our school, but also to maintain our facilities. For many years, you're looking at a system that's never received adequate funding for deferred maintenance. The Army Corps of Engineers came out and did an assessment years ago and found that the deferred maintenance cost was estimated at $110 million. That deferred maintenance estimate was understated and had a escalation because of the time. So it's probably closer to $150 million. Understanding that situation, we went straight to our federal sources, and that is the reason why our ARP funding is kind of earmarked at the $110 million level. We were following the assessment, so we looked at that study. The board and the superintendent developed a financial management improvement plan, and from there we took proactive measures to make sure we addressed all the critical CIP needs. That is a time-consuming process. We're doing everything we can to do the large-scale projects within the time frame that the grant allows.
Are you able to just generally go over the projects that are earmarked with that $110 million?
Yes, give me a second.
I mean, maybe if you could do that, Frank, and then share with us what's not going to be covered by the 110.
So let me just say what are some of the current critical contracts that we're identifying to be covered under ESF and ARP. We have our custodial grounds maintenance, our cleaning services, our extinguishers contract, custodial Guam cleaning master contract is going to be covered out of ESF2 and then switched over to ARP. We do have our pest control, our fire alarm system. These are all requisitions in progress and already contracted that we're using the ARP and the ESF funding for. In terms of local support, we're going to cover the difference to provide local funding for sanitary permits, solid waste collections, general fuel, and some of the facilities and maintenance materials and supplies. A large-scale contract, I believe that we were looking at about $80 million. That's the last number, and that's what we have currently. There's additional contracts that are supporting different breakout projects, but we do have $80 million, what we're calling the refurbishment of the schools, which covers the main CIP projects to include plumbing, electrical, canopies, and walkways and roofing. Among those, there's going to be other ESF and ARP leverage for the air conditioning contract, which is one of the larger contracts. And then we're looking at some different support that we're still using for FB Leon Guerrero, for GW Gym, all of the other progress or CIP projects that were deemed critical that needed the funding source to move forward.
So would you say it's the assumption that the Guam Department of Education is in possession of all of these federal funds and therefore they don't need any additional help? Would you say that's a false assumption?
Yes, I would be very cautioned to, to rely heavily on the federal funds to sustain operations and to address facility needs. Understanding that that's a limited pot, and we're going to do our best. GDOE has been proactive in going after the federal funds and applying those federal funds where we can deem it allowable and reasonable to use. In terms of supplementing the federal grants, and I hate to use those terms, but in terms of utilizing the federal grants to cover the shortfalls in the local government appropriations, I think that's something that we want to steer away from, have a better financial plan to address. Obviously, the grants are going to come with expiration dates, so the last year we dipped into the grants, the previous year we dipped in as well. This year we're trying our best to continue to make sure that the ESF ARP funding goes towards the intended purposes, not only for COVID-related items and the return to face-to-face learning, but to make sure that those earmarked funds for our CIP projects are no longer tapped into. So looking at the federal funds as a source of relief, absent the adequate local, it's really something that I would steer away and suggest not to do. We do need the adequate support, as we always did. And, you know, our expenses and our personnel costs, we have nurses that got a raise, we had teachers that just experienced a raise, and now you had the GPP. Our personnel costs have increased significantly. Our other critical contracts are only going upwards, as well as our utilities. So in terms of adequate funding, I would put the pressure that the legislature provides us with the adequate funding to make sure not only that we can run our baseline operations, but we have a chance to meet the requirements of the Adequate Education Act.
So in our conversations leading up to today, you had expressed that after all is said and done and you take care of the personnel costs, that would only leave $10 million for operations for the department?
Correct. And one of the complex things with our department is we have a volume, a high number of employees that we employ, but also that are limited term and come in and out with the times, right? So we have some limited term employee substitute, and then we have our regular permanent, and then we have some of them that are contractual and unclassed. But in terms of personnel costs, I can tell you right now, like when we look at the field positions, and I can tell you currently, without any of the separations, right now I average about $9 million in payroll every 2 weeks, and there's 26 pay periods in the year.
So when you talk about adequately funding you guys, and you say that there's $10 million left for ops after personnel and everything's taken care of, in your estimation, what would be an ideal and adequate amount of additional funding that this body could provide to the department? Don't say 100 billion.
So, and I'll just go back to what we put on the record in our budget submission. So if we get after the appropriation and I'm able to utilize the general fund appropriations to take care of my payroll costs, and I'm looking at anywhere from $10 to $13 million, and I can go upwards and have that little bit of a variance in terms of the figures. What we did request for was $16.3 million for power, $5.7 million for water, and you know, a nominal $500,000 for our telephone and data services for the schools. Those contracts, again, power at 16.3 and water at 5.7, were not covered. It was appropriated in last year, but when we were short, GDOE went to the federal funds to cover that. So this year, we're asking for that additional support. If you can give us the 20-some million dollars right here, we're looking at 6 and 6. So yeah, so just under 26 to $28 million additional to run the additional, cover our utilities, cover our critical contracts and water. I think we'll be in a better place, right? The $30 million, it's safe to say if you include power, water, telephone, data services, and some of the basic critical contracts, then we're probably in the neighborhood of about 30.
You know, in previous conversations, and you've shared here this morning that about $110 million in ARP is earmarked for critical CIP work. But when this body had appropriated an additional $20 million to the department, it was shared, and I want to say on the floor with the former acting superintendent that there were different projects that the GDOE had wanted to undertake with this $20 million, and if my memory serves me correctly, part of it was for facilities and maintenance, and then I think former acting superintendent Wampat had also shared that there was some playground work that you guys had wanted to do with this $20 million relative to perhaps coming into compliance with some of the issues that the Federal Head Start program had shared in their most recent visits. Frank, so can you just tell us, in a perfect world, if you still had that $20 million, what were you planning to use it for?
Actually, we do have something on the record that we're requesting and working directly with Homeland Security for support. And The $20 million was lined up for some of the immediate and critical needs of the department post-Typhoon. So mode mitigation, down fencing, supplies and materials, skilled laborers, and then a consultant to assist us in FEMA recoveries. Those were all part of the original plan. I know there has been some discussion about including some of that for playground, and then a large portion of that to establish the public-private partnership, so that we had a funding source to keep our facilities upkept past the fiscal year. So the $20 million was twofold to respond to emergency needs of the department post the Typhoon, and then to apply about 50% of that budget towards longer sustainable measures to address our facilities needs, such as the skilled laborers and the public-private partnerships.
Are you aware of the status of the, and I do have, thankfully Deputy Anderson was able to prepare a list of the pending projects that are tied to this $20 million. And so on the mold mitigation, according to this list, it says that it's still pending Office of Civil Defense and GSA procurement. What is the latest with the mold mitigation? And I ask because there's been, well, I've been overwhelmed with, and I'm sure you guys have had your share of it too, just concerns, messages as we approach the start of the school year next Wednesday. I mean, everybody from school aides to teachers to parents are reaching out to me relative to the mold, right? It's no secret. So what is the status of mold mitigation? And if you could just maybe start at the beginning, the submission of the DLAN ticket, which I believe was submitted on June 13th, and bring us to where we're at right now.
So maybe I'll go further back in time. Acting Superintendent Dr. Judy Wampad, in her last several weeks before she left the department, we were hit by the Typhoon. Immediately in response to taking corrective measures to address some of the facility needs, we submitted, and she submitted under her signature, a letter to request a partial drawdown of our $20 million to Director Ed Byrne at the time. At that time, that was for mold abatement and remediation and the replacement of physical damages at the school facilities. And we went through it. There was an itemized listing: damage of roofing structures, collapsed ceiling panels, broken window glasses, broken doors and jambs, damaged collapsed walls due to the strong winds, damaged electrical wirings and fittings, damaged water pipes, damaged school perimeter and fencing. So it was around this time where we found out that the $20 million was kind of reprogrammed to emergency needs of the government as a whole, and we were advised to work with Homeland Security. So I do have to say that ticket was put in the DLAN. There has been some movement in the support. Just recently, we did meet with Charles Estevez, who assured us that process, the scope of work was done, the assessments were done. The ticket was pushed along to a point where it just needed the final approvals from their procurement GSA. We're stuck in a situation and waiting on the support of DLAN, and you guys understand procurement and the need for us to have this services in place before school starts. So on the flip side of that, we're meeting him and we're trying to work, collaboratively to make sure that we have this implemented timely, but we do want to make sure that we do have access to the 20 million absent any support that's not provided.
Yeah, let me just ask you that, Frank. So if you guys had been in possession of the 20 million, if it had not been recalled or whatever the term is that we're using, is it your estimation that the department would have been able to procure any type of mold mitigation efforts sooner than the June, July, the 3 months it's taken, you guys through the Homeland Security, OCD?
That's hard to speculate and say that, with any degree of certainty that absent their procurement, our procurement would have been faster. I don't want to say that, but what would be more important is to recognize that the $20 million that was appropriated to GDOE is absolutely necessary for the support of our school system. Whether it's provided through DLAN or whether it's directly provided to us, we like the opportunity to have that source of funding available. And if it's not going to be provided in support services, then we have to take action to make sure that we have a direct appropriation so we can move things on our end. I hate to have a duplication of effort, a procurement that's double out in the market that's doing the same services. So The idea is that DLAN is the efficient process that went through the emergency procurement. There's a magnitude of resources providing to moving that forward. If we get the support through there, then we're going to be benefiting from that process, then we'll take it. And if not, then we need to be made clearly aware so that we can take matters into our own hand and start pushing things in on our end.
I'm not comfortable with the number of ifs, right? And I don't think anybody in this body is. Let's just go back to the scope of work and just some of the things that I've heard. So I had heard that this ticket was put in, and originally there was discussion about members of the Guard doing it. And now is the discussion more relative to displaced workers somehow being trained up by Guam EPA and then sent out to the schools with the Department of Labor? And in your opinion, is that something that's going to occur timely enough prior to the start of August 23rd? The start of schools on August 23rd?
We anticipate that those different avenues are going to be available to us for a while, and they'll be deployed in a priority order depending on the specific schools. The mold abatement side of it is not done by those folks, and that's part of a larger contract that is government of Guam wide. We have got that pushed to the front of the priority list so that the schools will be done before other agencies. But yet again, I have to see folks actually doing the work, and that hasn't happened yet. But those other resources that have come online, they've got some through the National Guard, some through the Army Reserve, and some through this Department of Labor process. We are going to augment our maintenance folks with those Department of Labor folks, but that was as of Friday. Today I haven't seen any new people, but we're trying to get that to go as fast as we possibly can, because that work that we're doing to bring all the schools up to standard will continue until we've completed it. We're not going to stop on that.
Right, but I mean, I'm just very sure that the Guam Department of Education stakeholders who are watching this, teachers, staff, are concerned that we're having this conversation about a very large mold mitigation job that hasn't even been started yet, and we're starting classes next Wednesday. So what is going to happen by next Wednesday? Are we going to be able to mitigate any of the mold that exists at the campuses? And also, if you don't mind, what has been the dollar amount that has been thrown around for the cost of this work? Because we've heard different things.
Have you seen a dollar amount?
So I can speak to what the school system is doing. I know that our administrators and their support staff are diligently working to prepare their facilities and their campuses. In terms of getting the school clean and ready, they're doing their best jobs. They're taking and addressing the molds. Is that the professional services that we're putting in the procurement? No. But we're doing our due diligence until we get the contractual support. In terms of estimations for cost for mold abatement, our original cost estimations, and this was done through our facilities and maintenance manager who did market research and got some companies' assessments and pricing, was 6.6. Recently, that number we looked at and made an adjustment to bring it down 50% to about $3.4 million.
Are you able to share anything about the scope of work? Is there is this just district-wide, or are there certain schools that need more of the $3 million worth of work done? Or
the ticket as we have it in is district-wide. Now, you have to also understand we have other contractors who own some of the facilities, and they're having to address that. They're included in the process, but they're funded separately.
Right, and so you're talking about some of the lease schools, because I am hearing that
that's correct.
The mold is pretty bad, and for example, I heard Ukadu.
And those schools are not going to open until they're mitigated.
Okay. Frank, so I'm looking at the status of some of these DLAN tickets, and it outside of the debris removal that was conducted by the Guard at all the 41 schools, and I know there's also an effort with the Army Corps currently underway.
Say again?
There's an effort with the Army Corps of Engineers to pick up white goods across the district as well?
Yes, there is.
So, and I know that one of my colleagues has an amendment that we're actually co-sponsoring, and this is relative to the $20 million. So, in looking at the tickets that you guys have put in for a lot of this and I'm going to print this out for my colleagues, a lot of this stuff hasn't even been addressed, a lot of your requests. Is that accurate?
I think a large number of them haven't been, so we're getting some of the support through some of the guard coming in and helping us at our schools, but in terms of the contractual and things tied to procurement and getting us supplies necessary, no, your assessment is correct.
Which is very frustrating because, again, they took your $20 million and outside of the debris removal that the guard did, which I think was just kind of part and parcel of what we normally do after a typhoon anyway, you don't have anything to show for that $20 million.
Correct.
Madam, may I have a point of information as to the format? Because I missed it in the beginning.
It's okay, Senator. We're going to do one round of questioning, and the second round, we'll do another second round if needed. But other than that, yeah. We won't be doing amendments until after they have left. So 2 rounds of questionings, and then we'll come back.
I guess my last question before the next round, Frank, just for the record, relative to the $20 million, you guys want it back.
That's an accurate assessment, yes.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome, Senator Barnett. Senator Christofinis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I value your time, and I'm sure everyone here does. I just want to make sure that I only want to ask 2 questions. Frank, I think it's very clear, and thank you, Dr. Swanson, for being here, Superintendent. I think it's abundantly clear, and I'm glad we had you down here to at least address this before my second question. And that is, there is a consistent discussion from Department of Administration, kind of a little bit concerning to me, that there's all these federal funds and we should not be putting any more local funds towards Department of Education because they need to expend these funds, and the fear of losing these funds and all this stuff is kind of commingled. And I gotta say, Frank, from every presentation you and your team have made to us, you're on it in terms of the reprogramming of these funds. You understand their termination dates. You understand their obligation dates. And in no way, in my humble opinion, I guess I'm presenting a leading question, is there really any relationship or any issue with regard to the much needed local funds that you need and that having anything to do with, preventing any possible loss of federal funds? Can you please address that?
And Senator, as you indicated, I think I would have to caution this body and the narrative of saying that we have ample federal funds to cover some of these critical operational expenses of the department. As you know, the federal government provided us these relief funds for specific purposes. So the department has to align the activities and the expenditure of those funds for specific purposes. We've done so. We've even been creative in going above and beyond and looking at different provisions to allow us to get to the support of power, critical contracts, CIP projects. But again, they come with specific objectives. They have award dates, they have obligation dates, they have expiration dates. And then I do want to caution that, again, we're on high risk. We have to use our federal funds appropriately for allowable uses only. When we do look at the shortfall in our local budget, I think the narrative has to change that we'll go dip into some of our federal funds to cover those expenses. What we do need is to really look at every opportunity from a funding source, and like you said, the 20 million and everything that we have uncollected, anything that was not provided appropriately to the department. It's kind of like looking at your own receivables in-house before you go to, we have to make sure that the department is adequately funded and funded at the right levels to meet the Adequate Education Act. And that 20 million, as our superintendent said, will go a long way. But additionally, all the other support from the TEF and the general funds, just to make sure that those level of appropriations don't see a decrease, but either steadily hold steady or we see an increase in those appropriations as well.
So I guess I just wanted to ensure, maybe I'm just putting this on the record, Frank and Mr. Superintendent, is that we've also included in our amendment for the $20 million that's going to come back to you as we place it in this current year budget as a carryover as per the public law, that you also are going to be first line of priority on any reimbursements in the event that they're running it that way, how they're operating DLAN or whatever it is, because that as far as we're concerned, the government of Guam is getting reimbursed. Every penny of that's yours. as a matter of fact, it really should be an additional appropriation then, because that means that all you did was effectively manage the resources under either a DLAN, operation or under your own operation, and that should be additional revenue that's available to you, because the reimbursement, the government of Guam didn't expend it. Didn't end up coming out of our general fund if we got reimbursed. So we're going to keep track of that too, but we're going to make sure your first priority.
I agree, and you're absolutely right. If we're looking at in terms of resources provided and net gains in terms of local support, anything that we're being provided as services under the DLAN that is deemed reimbursed by FEMA doesn't directly take away from the 20. It's going to act as a revolving fund. So if you provided the 20 million to DLAN and they're procuring on behalf of our services, and that's a 90-10 reimbursable rate, then that $20 million is still out there and available for appropriation, and we would like to see, and we can apply it. There's many things on our list that you guys are well aware of in terms of our facility needs, that money can be really used to serve the district.
Madam Chair, just as I close, I'm sure you will work with us on this too. That is exactly how we can get to what DOE has requested in terms of their actual really need and ask of that 30 million. We can creep that way as per the way the chairman has mentioned his issues too. Want to expand on that, Frank?
That's actually a creative way to look at it. If you gave us the 20 million and we're able to get the reimbursements from the 20 million, it'll provide some of that direct source funding as a FEMA reimbursable. And then if you were to look at the amount on top of the 20 million, then you're looking at covering a shortfall from the appropriations that I just said that we can realize. So if we're about $30 million short, you have the 20 million and you have the reimbursables from FEMA. Hopefully that gets appropriated and we can realize that appropriation so that we can cover our power, our water, and our basic contracts.
And that doesn't affect the net year budget. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome, Senator Duenas. Minority Leader, Senator Frank Blas, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here, Dr. Swanson, Mr. Cooperners. I'm going to flog a dead horse here, okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Mr. Cooperners and Mr. Swanson, Dr. Swanson, your ARP-OA SCA funding, all right? What was that for?
Say again?
What was that for? What was that initially intended for?
So the ARP, the award was $286.9 million, and basically the grand objectives of ARP was to address the many impacts of COVID-19 on students.
Okay. And when you received that money, you also then had to submit a prioritization list?
Sure.
Okay. What was on that prioritization list? How did you intend to initially use that money?
So the intentions of the COVID-19 funds were to address the impacts of interrupted instructions, strategies to meet students' social, emotional, mental health, and academic needs, evidence-based summer after-school and other extended learning and enrichment programs, and then the last one was for early childhood education, that all students have access to teachers, counselors, and school personnel for support, and then support at-risk students who have been severely impacted by the pandemic. Okay. So those were the activities that were aligned with the $286 million for the district, and from there we developed a budget narrative to be aligned with those activities.
Okay, but did those priorities also include basically infrastructure improvements?
So the return to face-to-face and the impacts of uninterrupted instruction, yes, we kind of looked at that in a matter of recovering past COVID. We needed to get our students in an environment of learning, and we realized that the return to face-to-face was one of the models that this grant can be used for. So on the return to face-to-face instruction and making sure that we have strategies to meet the students' educational and academic needs, we aligned some of those activities to make sure that it addressed the facility deficiencies, which included the CIP projects. Okay.
And did some of these CIP projects include mechanical priorities? I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Did some of these, I guess, to meet these to meet what you had intended to provide in as far as adequate and safe education, did it include mechanical priorities, work on mechanical infrastructure?
Yes, it did.
Did it include electrical priorities?
Yes, it did.
And did it include plumbing priorities?
It was blanketed under the facilities again, and it was captured under a budget that was going to be provided to our CIP improvements.
And did it include roofing priorities?
Yes.
Yeah. And did it include pest control priorities?
We later made some amendments to include some of the critical contracts. Pest control was one of them.
Okay. Did it also include site priorities or capital improvement plan contract management services for small and medium contracts?
Originally, in the first submitted budget, it included that breakdown for three, small, medium, and large. Correct.
Okay. You aware that some of these those priorities, at least in totality, could have amounted to about $13.6 million?
Repeat that, I'm sorry.
Are you aware that you had submitted that in order to accomplish these priorities or to work on these priorities, you anticipated that it was going to cost you about $13.6 million?
I can't confirm that exact figure because I thought my number's a little bit higher in terms of...
It's a little bit higher, somewhere close to 20 million, huh?
For CM? Mm-hmm. For CM?
No, for all those priorities that I had just articulated.
It was a little bit higher, my original assumptions. Again, the grant was transferred to me. Those are the original submissions. I know that when we worked with Judy, we reprioritized our CIP priorities, so that was upwards of $100 million.
Okay.
Which included those projects that you mentioned.
So in the inclusion of these projects and basically what GDOE permitted to be done, Mr. Swanson, was that on or about May of last year, you basically decided to deprioritize these efforts in the amount of over $21 million. Is that correct, Mr. Cooper?
I wouldn't say deprioritize. Mm-hmm. And the way that the process works is the budget came in short. They needed a funding solution. They needed what we do in the department, what's called a spend plan. Mm-hmm. And we go through the process of submitting a budget, which all the principals and divisions take part of. It goes through the board. The board puts together under its review and approves the budget. We come down to the legislature and ask for a set amount of money. From there, the legislature appropriates that money. When the appropriation doesn't meet the ask, there's some backwards work that we have to work with our finance committee and our budget team. So we realign the priorities, and we have to take action to make sure that we stay within local appropriation levels. At that given time, the then superintendent made a conscious decision to go and utilize some of our federal grants to cover some of these shortfalls on areas that were deemed allowable by USAID.
Mm. Okay, that's nice. What is the termination date or expiration date to be able to use up this funding at ARP, OA funding?
So for ESF1, the expiration passed, it was 9/30/2022. ESF2, expiration is 9/30/23, and ARP funding's expiration is 9/30/2024.
So specifically the ARP OA SCA funding was 2024?
Correct.
Okay. And you took $21 million out of that funding to be able to pay teacher pay and incentive pay, right? The $20 million that you were supposed to receive through the legislation that we were talking about, when do you anticipate, if you were to get that money, and if you had that money, how fast would you be able to spend it?
As fast as our process in place will allow for.
So it is more than likely you can probably spend that money before September of 2024.
Depending on the needs and how we align with the procurement mechanisms or mode of procurement, there's a good chance that we can use that if we get the $20 million to utilize that as the front source on FEMA reimbursements.
Okay.
So yes.
What I'm doing here, gentlemen, is to make the case for you to get the $20 million that was appropriated to you, okay? Because when you gave up the $21 million last year, I'm sure there was a conversation of being able to, if you need that money elsewhere, it'll come to you.
So the conversation was, and we knew it, is one of the things that when they pulled from the CIP, one of the things that needed to be prioritized was our facilities. So we made that effort with Dr. Judy at the time to reprogram back into the CIP projects, understanding, like as you just said, that even the 110 itself was an aged number, and the escalation for some of the facilities would have gone up based on our advisement from Corps of Engineers. So we're looking at 110 at a point in time figure years ago with escalation costs and almost nearing 150, and that was pre-typhoon. Now with the typhoon, you're just adding on millions of dollars more of damage. The initial damage assessments, as reported by our damage assessment team and our then acting superintendent, was about 14 million. I know those numbers are kind of conservative, but if you were to give us the $20 million, the answer is yes, absolutely. There's a critical need to prioritize the expenditures for our department. And like I said, if we can have that aligned with some of our federal reimbursements in terms of FEMA recoveries, that'll be something that we can expend pretty efficiently.
Yeah, okay. You know, because at the time that you had taken the $21 million out of it, there was about $87 million in excess funding that was available to be able to be appropriated by this body had we been asked to be able to do this. And at that time, too, there was well over $250 million in the governor's ARP funding that she could have taken $20 million from. But in at least $20 million was taken from that funding that could have been utilized to be able to deal with a number of the priorities and those issues you have to deal with today, of which you were asking the $20 million for. So what I'm getting at, okay, is that had you not spent the $20 million the way you spent it back in May of last year, and you could have still been able to satisfy or provide those raises, had there was a discussion about the utilization of other available funding sources, we wouldn't be having this $20 million conversation today. Okay? But instead, right now, you're having to sit here before us and ask to be able to provide to you monies that first off you had, but you gave up, assumably with a promise that, don't worry, we'll cover you in case something happens, and now you're having to beg for it. I'm making the case for you, Mr. Swanson, and as far as so that we can get the $20 million into your coffers, so that it's necessary. Okay? I don't, this happened before your time. Mr. Cooper Nurse, I'm sure there was many conversations he had with, as far as, some of the reservations he had in being able to do this at that time, and we're here. Okay? I need to bring this up in as far for historical purposes and historical value, because then there becomes the necessity and the reason as to why your $20 million is necessary. You provided it, one, to fulfill, I'm going to call it out as it is, you have to fulfill a political promise. But now when the reality comes and there's no money, you're being left to hold the bag.
That seems to be a trend. I appreciate I appreciate the historical perspective. The reality is, though, we've got to move forward.
Yes, and we have to move forward.
And I appreciate the support from this body to help us do that. And all I can do is ensure that we are realigning and remaking our organization so that we can stay true to that commitment.
And I assure you, Mr. Swanson, that this body and all of its efforts wants to be able to provide you with all the resources necessary so that you can get back up on your feet. Okay? I bring this as historical, for historical reference, because we shouldn't have been in this place. Granted that we had a storm, but at that time too, you should have had $20 million in your coffers to be able to handle it. And now that you're asking for it, they're finding it very difficult to provide it to you. Okay, so we're going to continue to push for that. I just wanted to make sure that based on all of these conversations, it's not the legislature that's holding you back from wanting to fulfill those mandates. It's the front office. Okay? Thank you. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you, Minority Leader Senator Blas. Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Kuberners and Dr. Swanson, exclusive from the total needed by the Department of Education, we have section 7 or 3719, 20, 21, and 22 basically calls for an additional close to 6.7 million from the general fund. Is that correct? Sections 3. Okay, section, yeah. Yeah, the question is that additional on top of the you asking for, 246, 907?
I'm sorry. So, Senator, as I go through the bill, and I'll have to take a closer look at all the additional sections. Yes, as I look at the summary appropriations, your reference is to the textbook appropriation of 1.5.
Yes.
Is that additional? And the question was, is that additional to the 246 million?
246,907. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's the way I read it, and I'll go back and verify and make sure that that's accurate. But at least as I go through the numbers, it does look like the 1.5 is a set-aside appropriations for specific purposes.
Okay. Yeah, no, because these are, like I said, these are the section 3, 7, 19, 20, 21, and 22 are appropriations for the general fund. And I'm just wanting, again, section 3, 7, 19, 20, 21, and 22. Again, whether or not these are appropriations outside of the total that outside of the 246,907. Does that kind of look like it?
Right now, as it appears in the form of the way it's presented, it does look like the textbook is outside of the general summary that's provided for the section under GDOE. Correct.
Okay. Now, let me ask, in regards to the section 21 and salary increase, calling for 500,000 allocated in general fund as sole purpose is funding the payout for Department of Education employees for salary increments. What employees are that? I mean, $500 million. Have they not gotten their increments or?
So we're going through that process right now and trying to catch up. But generally speaking, the department has been on track and in target to meeting all the increment requirements. We do get the appropriations to fulfill that promise. So internally, if there's any lag in there, then we have to look at whether the evaluation was timely completed and whether or not the employee is processed in and getting that PA through the workflow so that it can be paid out. But for the most part, the increments of the Department of Education are on time.
Are on time, okay. How about the merit bonuses as well, right above it, section 20?
So so section 20, the merit bonuses of $3.1 million, and in years past, this used to be blanketed in with the general fund appropriations to cover our merit bonuses, but what had transpired in years is that for many years, GDOE employees' merit bonuses weren't being paid out timely. So I'm happy to say that this year, merit bonuses with the appropriation levels, we were able to make get on track and make good and get them current.
Okay.
So we have made efforts, and this is the first year, I think, that we date back since, I want to say 2014, that the merit bonuses have been paid out. So we're working towards full implementation and keeping that going in the next fiscal year.
Okay. How about section 22 here? The menstrual hygiene products for Guam Public School System, $100,000. Do we not have federal funding that's available for that?
We do. So one of the things that we do is the appropriation level comes in years past. We use a small amount of money for that appropriation. But generally speaking, there is an avenue for us to kind of leverage our federal grants again and then utilize that to specifically address the menstrual hygiene products for GPS, for DOE.
Okay.
And we have in the past, and I know that there's a continuation of that services, or at least that activity to get some of the funding. But when that funding is not available, then we go into the 100,000.
Oh, okay, so how much do you think of that federal funding is available?
I don't know how much of the federal funding is available for this specific item, because I think it'll be blanketed under a different activity. I can verify that for you, but I can tell you that just in my understanding of the local budget and reviewing this appropriation versus expenditure, we haven't utilized the full 100,000 in years past, because we've been
you have not utilized.
We have not utilized the full 100,000 in years past. We were able to utilize a lot of it from the federal.
From federal, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome, Senator Lujan. Senator Joanne Brown, you're next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You know, I have to say, this is where the chickens and the roosters and the hens come home to roost, because here we are now beginning the process of looking at this budget, and now we are seeing, at least on the side of DOE, what they see as a substantial decrease to the amount of money that they requested and what they're saying they need to operate this fiscal year. The issue with regards to the power is not a revelation. That came out last year when the acting director relayed, or acting superintendent, that federal funds were being used to cover power costs. So obviously the reality for this fiscal year was the expectation that the general fund was going to absorb that. So, and we're also aware, again, it was mentioned by one of our colleagues last year when the pay raises were announced prior to the election. It was not something the legislature initially appropriated. It was something that was taken out of DOE's operations, and some of those things were actually taken out of maintenance funding that was intended for the very issues that are being brought up now to address and mitigate those concerns in our public schools. But I didn't hear anybody here screaming about that last year. And then the legislature went through the budget last year and went ahead and did these increases, and now we're in a situation where they're almost looking at being underfunded by, $40+ million. And short of taking every other operation out of this government and these smaller agencies, I'm very curious how the legislature or even the administration intends to fund it. So what is going to happen, if I can ask our superintendent or Mr. Cooper-Nurse, what is the impact going to be for you if you don't get these increased amounts and the budget currently stays as it is at current funding levels? What deficiencies are you going to have?
The first deficiency we'll have is being able to adequately staff our schools. So class sizes, and we've already gone into limited hiring freeze, and that will have to continue. When we look at the bills that actually come in, for example, the power bill, that takes the whole general fund. So we still have to find a number of other savings. We may be able, through supplement, through some of our consolidated grant funds, but we have to be very careful about how we do that, because each section of that grant has specific language of what you can and cannot use that money for. And the key words are supplement, not supplant.
Yes.
And if we get into that problem, we'll never recover. So
yes.
We're still looking for places to cut. I don't want to cut maintenance. I see where that gets you. However, I'm considering how we restructure the district, but that's going to take more than one budget year to do, to reduce our overhead in terms of facilities and personnel. That's going to take some realignment and some effort with this body and also with our community. So right now, we don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer yet for how we're going to pay that bill.
I can probably add to some of the impacts. And Senator, as you're aware, in your background, you've run major government operations and departments. So absent full funding, all right, what does that look like for the department? If we get this budget and I do not go back to ARP, I can tell you financially speaking, that's going to be very challenging. Number one, our biggest expense that's fixed is my personnel cost. Do I all of a sudden, short of appropriations, have to do cost, do I have to implement a different work schedule? Two things have to happen. Is absent adequate funding, you're going to go into cost strategy matters. There's going to be two things, cost curtailment or cost cuts, right? And do you cut payroll? Do you limit working hours? Do you look for shrinking the workforce? These are all options that are going to have to be carefully analyzed. Other things is if the appropriation levels are short, is contractual support. What contracts are not going to be funded? What contracts can we push off for another year? What contracts can we limit the scope? Additionally, when you look at the contracts that we do have, absent the appropriate cash release, you will look at growing payables. When I took the job, payables was at $16 million. We split that in half. So we're doing our best in terms of financial management, but again, your strategy will look at, without the appropriate adequate funding levels, you're looking at two measures as cost curtailment and cuts. We have to make the numbers equal. And then when we do so, you jeopardize impacting, the businesses will be impacted in how soon they can provide services and get paid, what contracts we actually have as support. And then obviously our ability to comply with the Adequate Education Act and the 14 points, and then also have funding available to address any facility maintenance repairs long term. So you're not going to have those types of supports absent the adequate funding.
Well, knowing the financial realities, again, this is a creation of the Department of Education, and it was, it's like the flames that were helped here by the legislature in confirming, because actually the increased funding in the raise that was given to DOE actually facilitated the rest of the raises in the government of Guam. And I know, Superintendent Swanson, this was before your time, this was last year, but it's also something DOE created because your predecessor essentially prioritized the pay raises. Because I'm a little concerned now for all these other appropriations financially, colleagues, that some of you yourself, some are new, but others that were here previously supported. And now we're here at what we would say is one of the most critical departments in the government of Guam is funding Department of Education, and yet now they are substantially short in this budget. But it's also one of DOE's creation. I mean, to take money from the repairs that are needed that we're hearing colleagues here cry about, and yet that money was taken without legislative authorization at the time, or approval by the legislature, to address the pay raises. And that was something that all the way up until earlier this year was being defended and protected. The arguments, and I appreciate Mr. Cooper Nurse outlining those key needs because they're very critical needs, we understand that, but that's not what was brought forward by the leadership of DOE when the pay raises were prioritized. And now we're seeing the substantial increased cost to government in real tangible ways is affecting our ability to properly educate our children. So colleagues, please keep that in mind as you continue to throw appropriations and try to get money that doesn't even exist yet, because you cannot even take care now of the critical priorities of education. I wanted to ask you in this document here that was passed out concerning your trying to address your corrections and mitigation efforts for the school, to try to get them open. And I noticed here with regards to the status of some of these things that you need, the mold mitigation and the need to address the cyclone fencing at these schools, I assume that may have been damaged by the typhoon. It says it's pending OCD GSA procurement. Why are you waiting for them? I mean, aren't you capable? Don't you have the procurement ability at DOE to do this? And is this still pending, or have they facilitated this procurement for you, or are they assisting you? Or what is the status of all this?
We have been using our internal resources all the way through, to include community staff and our maintenance folks. So there's been a great deal of clean up, clean out operational work going on in all of the campuses. But at the same time, one of the requirements that we need to have is that certified mold mitigation process that's done. I believe this one will be under the auspices of EPA in terms of license. So we have to have that too, but we've been using all of our resources and done quite a bit. And so our schools are, how should I say, every picture that you see that's been put up on social media of a train wreck of a school, if you go look at that school, it doesn't look like that anymore. The work that's been done, our communities, our mayors have stepped up. Many different private organizations have helped up in that process, school by school. And now we have our schools going through the inspection process and passing readily. So that work has been being done. We have not neglected it.
Well, and certainly I think we're very happy to hear that and all the efforts that are being put forth by everyone in the community that you're relaying that have come out to assist. But I wanted to inquire, has this procurement assistance they're supposed to provide or is listed here, has it been provided? Do you have the contracts in place for your fence repairs and your mold mitigation?
The last discussion I heard, and this was the end of last week, there was a problem with the individual who was allowed to do the procurement, and they had to be replaced. That's been done. Now, I don't know if the status of the contracts is this morning, but it's supposed to have been moved forward.
All right, is DOE able to do this procurement? Because I'm assuming this has been here for a while.
So let me comment, Senator.
Okay,
so the reason, and it's kind of goes through the line of questionings with your colleagues. So one of the things that we were in, again, in our initial measures was in order to fund this, in order to go out and procure such services, and you're familiar, it's the good faith requirement, you have to have a certifying officer say there's funds available to go and procure a service. So understanding where our local budgets are tied and the appropriation levels we had, we did not have funding authorization to go out and do all these additional services or the money behind that. Understanding that we did have federal grants that we could possibly use for damage remediation, the requirement with FEMA reimbursements is the duplications of effort. So if we used a federal source, we weren't going to get reimbursed. So the idea was to go immediately to ask for the 20 million, use that as a revolving fund from getting federal reimbursements into the department. When we didn't have that access, we were, Judy, our then acting superintendent, was coordinating those efforts with the front office to make sure that we had the support through an emergency process in the DLAN. That is the efforts that contributed to our open tickets to the DLAN system. So the idea is, do we have those contracts in place now? We had the support, we're still waiting for the contracts.
If they're not moving forward, because I'm kind of gauging, it's been several months since the storm. I mean, are they going to move forward to assist you? Because obviously these are critical needs with regards to your mold mitigation and your fencing, for security of the safety of the school.
We're keeping those discussions, and we're going to have routine meetings again with Homeland Security. I know our superintendent just indicated that we did have one last week where it was saying it was pending final approval from our GSA procurement department to make sure that we can get those contracts executed.
Do you have the funding set aside already for this?
The funding source through the DLAN tickets, not with GDOE. That's the reason why we enter tickets and get the benefit of the service. But no, we don't have that funding source. That funding source is under the governor's office.
And do you know if they have that funding source available?
I haven't looked, but I'm assuming that if they're doing the scope of work and going through the process, that they did meet the requirements.
With my remaining seconds, I appreciate your response, but I think, colleagues, this is really starting to show the reality. I mean, even though we're hearing that we're having extensive amounts of additional monies, that we're jumping up and down, we're adding another $100 million to the budget. We're already seeing a critical area of service here that is not being funded, and I am concerned. I hope they do have the funding available to assist in the procurement for both the fencing and the mold. But I'm going to continue to remind you throughout this budget process because I think this is a major revelation and one that's very concerning. But thank you for your response. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome, Senator Brown. Vice Speaker Tina Munoz-Barnes.
Madam Chair, and thank you again for the panel being here this morning. I just want to maybe ask for a reiteration from you, Frank, based on the good senator's questioning on the federal grants that are provided to DOE from Senator Guåhan about mandate of Public Law 36-66. I know that the funding for the period Poverty Act of 2021, which is in statute now, specifically says that program needs to be funded. And you were saying that it comes from a federal grant?
I'm sorry, Senator, is the reference to the appropriation that's provided for menstrual hygiene?
Yes.
Yes, so we do get a local appropriation. In years past, we have used it, but in very small amounts. We do have support for supplies and materials that can be covered under a federal grant. So there's been a combination of using both funding sources.
So how sure can you say that that dissemination or that line item will be provided if there is a proffered amendment to delete that section? How sure of you that will be provided for this statute?
I would hate to be on the record to anticipate or foresee and have any insight on how the funding source will be made available for years to come. So I think that in any event, we can only look at history and look at what we've done in terms of expenditures to get at estimations of what we'll need. But to try to, predict that we'll continue to have those funding sources available for many years to come, I don't want to go on the record as saying that. I would say that as long as it's available, we'll make sure that we can leverage the services. So I think it's safe to say that in terms of meeting a mandated requirement in law, some appropriation level should be provided to make sure that we have some monies available, or give us the authority, as the superintendent has in transfer authority, to make sure that we meet the requirement, which is already established in law.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll continue to hear what other inquiries my colleagues have. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Vice Speaker. Senator Shelton.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel for being here this morning. Good morning to both of you. I wanted to ask about the textbook funding at the Department of Education. And can you give us a little information on what the status is and what kind of partnerships you are engaged in at this time?
So currently the legislature in years past has provided a $1.5 million appropriation level to Guam Department of Education. In the process of getting access to those funds, GDOE has to provide supported invoices to DOA to get the cash releases to support those costs. The strategy that we used in years past, again, in terms of covering budget shortfalls and addressing some of our needs, was we actually used a lot of the textbooks under federal grants, the consolidated grants specifically. So therefore, we were not able to have adequate invoices because of the duplication of expenses to submit for a local reimbursement. So some of that money has not been released, and right now in the current process, I know that our acting superintendent and I met with the UOG, and they've been working with our CNI folks that UOG be a provider of these textbooks and get a portion of the appropriations directly. So my understanding is that the appropriation release of $1.5 million will be decreased to $1 million for GDOE, and $500,000 would be made available to UOG for the purposes of providing the textbooks.
And so that is a partnership that you are comfortable with and confident in using our resources at the University of Guam?
I don't speak for the Curriculum and Instruction Division of our department, but I know our Deputy Superintendent, Joe Sanchez, was supportive. He's indicated that in several meetings and even in an email directly to UOG. This is probably going to provide efficiencies in process and get us these textbooks.
Yes, okay, that's good to hear. In the last legislature, we passed the Period Poverty Act to require the Guam Public Schools and our institutions of higher learning to provide menstrual products to our young students in the schools. And last year, we had a line item appropriation to the Department of Education. And can you tell us if this line item was used for products in the schools?
I don't have the exact expenditure report that ties to that line item. Like I said, I know only in years past that a nominal amount was used because we were using federal grants to support it. So I can pull those figures for you and get back to you on how much it was actually used for the menstrual hygiene products. Okay. But for the most part, I do realize that a large portion of those costs were covered by federal grants.
Yes, and now that we have this Period Poverty Act, a mandate by law, if those federal dollars are not available or not enough for the menstrual products, we will need to pay for that from some other source.
Correct. Any appropriation level within the Guam Department of Education that you can say can be utilized for such purposes can be made available. So.
And can you share with us if there was still a need beyond that appropriation? Because we had some reports that even with the $100,000 that was a line item appropriation for the department last year, that still was not enough to meet the needs with any federal grants available.
I'm sorry, is the question, just to clarify, the question is, do we need a continuous appropriation of $100,000 for the menstrual hygiene products? Is that your question, Senator?
My question is, was there still a need beyond the $100,000 in this last fiscal year? Because we got reports that there were not enough of these menstrual products in the schools.
And that would be concerning. So if there wasn't enough and we fell short on providing the items with the federal source, then we do have some local funds available, and we'll push that forth. So I would have to go back, reconcile the ask, the procurement versus the appropriation, and see if we fell absolutely short or not. Because my understanding is the appropriation level should suffice the need. So if the grant's not covering it, there is a local funding source that we can dip into. If there's the need exceeds the appropriation level, then I'll get back to you to see how much of that is over.
Okay, so included in this budget again is the $100,000. And so if in the event that there are not enough federal grants, this $100,000 will be there to help us fulfill public law, the public law of the Period Poverty Act of 2021, 36-66.
I think the strategy of keeping it in to comply with the law would be a good one to maintain.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, that's all the questions I have.
Where is that? We're going to take a short recess.
Senator Fisher, I'll recognize you at this time.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. I'm looking at of the budget on page 13, section 6. The Guam Department of Education Alternative Dispute Resolution Mediation Services, DOE is asking for $40,000. Did that fund exist in this year's budget?
Frank?
I have to go back and verify, but my understanding is yes, this is a continuation appropriation.
Okay. How much of the how much alternative dispute resolution and mediation services took place within the Department of Education last year?
Senator, I apologize, I don't have those figures in front of me, so that's something that I would have to pull and get back to you on.
Okay, are you aware of whether or not there are any, I looked on the website, couldn't find any rules and regulations as to the expenditure and use of funds available for alternative dispute resolution?
I believe there are developed some rules and regulations, but again, I'm not part of that process. I would only be able to trace it from an expenditure side to see whether or not those services were provided, how much, and who in fact, and when these costs were utilized for the period.
Okay, but we don't have that information before us right now?
I don't have that on me. Like I said, it's something that I can be able to go back and pull.
Okay, and I'd appreciate that, but I'm sure that you appreciate as an accountant that how difficult it would be for the body to spend $40,000 without knowing how the $40,000 will be expended. So that's one problem I have. Perhaps it can be resolved. And then if I could ask you to go to page 18, section 19, payout of bonuses, rewards, and incentives program. And if you just look up when you found that. Okay, thank you. Now, the bonuses, rewards, and incentive program is for the recruitment and retention of teachers. That's specifically what it's devoted to. And now that's $1 million. And it sounds, frankly, Mr. Cooper Nurse, it sounds a little slushy, if you know what I mean, right? I couldn't find rules or regulations about the distribution of the $1 million. You know, if you recruit a calculus teacher, you get $100. But if you get a home ec teacher, you get $150. I mean, there's no rules and regs that I've been able to discover on how this $1 million is being spent.
I do believe there's some guidance, and I have to search the rules and regs, but I do know that there's procedures that we do follow and how we apply it and where it's applied. In my experience as the DFAS, I know that it's been applied for those hard-to-fill critical positions, primarily with SPED.
Are these bonuses for the recruitment? Or
recruitment efforts.
Okay, and so if you can find a critical need teacher, they might get a $10,000 bonus for coming to Guam or something like that? If
they're a specialized licensed professional in the area of SPED, then usually there's a recruitment bonus that we are able to apply. But again, it goes through like several processes and guidelines, and there's even a procedure that it goes to board for special approval. Okay, so it has to be critical, it has to have the need, it has to be justified, then it gets posted, and then it has to be approved by the board.
By the board. Do you know who has the authority to expend the money? Is that the board or the superintendent? Or?
No, but in terms of the recruitment efforts, I think we've aligned it so that we get their approval for anything above step, anything on a recruitment incentive bonus, anything in the upfront additional costing. We do go through a different process. Okay.
I mean, that's the whole question, the process. I don't think the legislature is aware of the process. And, you know, just like on the alternate dispute resolution, I think you could appreciate that the legislature would be reluctant to spend $1 million when we didn't know how the money was being used, what standards, were required for an expenditure. Would you agree with that? I know that you're a CPA, sir.
So I believe the appropriation level, and as I understand it in handling the alternative dispute resolutions, is that the department was held to a standard that it had to get outside counsel to sit on having dispute resolutions and handling it. So I believe that's where this expense goes to fund that contract. But like I said, I didn't see, you were asking about guidelines and SOPs and how this process was established.
Yeah.
And the costing for that, I will have to get back to you for that. But my understanding is that's how we handle that, primarily with SPED, and then we do have alternative and mediation services that are provided.
So, and at the last part of what you were saying, I assume that you were referring to Section 19, rewards and incentive program? Well, that's fine. Don't answer. You don't need to answer that. I would just offer to you, because I've looked for the rules and the regulations, and I would assume that those would be in place before we would give you $1 million to conduct this program. And so I just I'm having problems with that, as well as the 40,000 in alternative dispute resolutions without some sort of rule or regulation that will explain to us how you're spending it. Thank you, ma'am. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Typhoon, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. We'll try and make this a little short, but I was really taken back to know that the numbers that you provided earlier with $9 million pay period, is that still true to form? That every pay period or every 2 weeks, it's about $9 million in salaries?
That's the average for the year past the implementation of the teacher, the nurses, and the GPP pay increases, correct.
Okay.
So we've seen a significant increase over the year.
Okay, so it's about $9 million for your pay period, and then it's 26 weeks, is what you said? So
correct.
That's a total of $234 million, correct?
Correct.
$234 million in your budget right now, including the additional appropriation from the general fund of $6.7 million on top of your total of $246,907, you're looking at close to almost 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, about almost $256 million total, and you have a salary of $234. That doesn't leave a whole lot of room for much of anything else.
You can understand my concern if the appropriation levels doesn't reach. I do want to qualify that the $9 million is the average. I've seen it go higher, and I've seen it dip slightly below. The $9 million payroll includes about $1.3 million in federal employees that we get reimbursed after we meet the criteria for reimbursement. So there is a local requirement, because we're on high risk, to pay everything out of the local funds first and then seek a reimbursement.
Yeah, so it's quite, if any accountant can see that, or anybody running a business can see that you're falling short when it comes to other than salaries, operational costs, and of course maintenance. And so when you have money coming from the general fund to cover these areas that are really desperately needed, then you use general fund money, but when you get legislation that, and I'm going to go back to the menstrual, because it's important to understand that we don't want, this government does not want us to see subsidizing something that was covered by federal grants, where we can use federal grants instead of using general fund money, because we know that general fund money is not restrictive to what we can use it for. But federal funds can be very restrictive. And if it gives you the opportunity to utilize federal funds, that's where we need to go to. But we don't, if the federal funds are no longer available, people here are starting to look at the general fund to subsidize what was once being paid by federal funds. Now, the menstrual section in your section of the bill calls for $100,000 from general fund money. Now, when the bill that everybody's talking about, or Public Law 3666, requiring for menstrual products in EOG and DOE, there was no appropriation in that bill whatsoever, because they told us they would be utilizing federal funds to cover it. So that was something we all felt comfortable with. Of course, federal funds will utilize that. And now here we are today using general fund money for something that was federally funded last year. We all know that you're in dire need of funding, and taking away from general fund to DOE is physically irresponsible and is a detriment to our children, our students. So, Mr. Coupeners, earlier you mentioned when Senator Guåhan was asking you that the federal funds that you have didn't even come close to $100,000. That's what you mentioned earlier. Is that still true to form?
So, no, I think clarify. So the the request for the item, the menstrual products, didn't come close to the $100,000 appropriation level.
Right.
That's correct. So right now, and I just got an update, so as a FY23, what we have in requisition flow to use is about $24,000 out of the 100,000. And then let me just clarify that, again, if we're looking at the federal funding source to be sourced to cover some of these local expenditures, we have to be very careful with the supplement versus supplant provisions. If it's a law that's mandated, you want local funds to be aligned. So if this law was mandating the menstrual, it's going to need a local funding source to make sure that there's at least a proportional share covered under there. If there's any additional things that we can cover with the federal grant, that could possibly be why there was no appropriation in years past, and then when you included the appropriation, the federal funding source may be something that we have to closely examine to make sure that there isn't a supplement versus supplant provision.
Yeah, so the bill, Public Law 36-66, did not have a funding source at all because we were assured it was going to be covered by federal funds.
Okay.
So we're hoping that stays true to form because it's obvious that this budget, is not going to be as lucrative as it was in the past years in FY21, 22, or even in 23, which we've for sure over appropriated. We've spent money we didn't have basically in 2023. So we're trying very desperately and very with the oversight chair as well as Senator Duenas trying to capture that $20 million that we had intended for DOE to be covered. So I appreciate you being here today and taking the time out because I know you're super busy trying to get that deadline of August 23rd. So other than that, I have no more further questions, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Tadekwi. Speaker Terlai, you're recognized to the panel.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for expressing very frankly your understanding of our current budget proposal for DOE. So DOE needs $234 million for payroll for the year. We're giving them $246.9 million according to this budget, which also includes, or $246 million, which includes school lunches, which are, pardon?
The school lunches, we get it in the Budget Act, but we did not get cash behind that.
Right, so what I'm saying is while we're saying we're appropriating 246, you're actually only getting 236?
246 less than 12.5, correct.
Yes. So the funds that, and then you said you need about $30 million, you need $20 million to cover utilities. So payroll and utilities, you need 234 plus 20, 254. And then you said 10 million more for critical contracts. So that would be 254 to 64, right? So, and then you told us we're 20 to $30 million short to cover the very basics, which are payroll, utilities, and the $10 million of critical contracts that are not covered under the ARP or the ESF grants, and that you need to operate and manage the schools for the school year. All right, could you go through the budget bill itself? There's a bunch of allocations as well. So in addition to allocating out of what we're supposedly giving you, we're allocating $12 million for the lunches. That goes off right away and is distributed by DOA. There's also almost all of the special provisions in here say this amount shall be allocated from the funding. So it reduces what we just talked about, those uses, by these amounts as well, such as $614,000 must be allocated to sports, right? Coaches, assistant coaches, and that's not included in your personnel?
No, that's funded out of the Healthy Futures.
Pardon?
That's a separate line item appropriation, that's Healthy Futures.
Yeah.
And that amount of 614, we're averaging over $1 million for sports-related activities.
Okay. All right, what about the other allocations in here?
So goes through the textbooks, the Healthy Futures Fund, the Limited Gaming Fund. The Healthy Futures Fund we're using to do sports and to address some of our nursing requirements. The Public School Library Resource Funds, that goes to our textbooks and supplies and then to support the public library and our librarian cost as well. The Guam Educational Facility Fund, that's formerly known as the TEF. That's based on collection of property taxes, and we use that to fund our critical contracts. The remaining fund is the general fund, which is 220. That's general ops, generally for us. Limited gaming fund of $346,000. This is a specific appropriation to address some of our facilities needs. As you're aware, that this can only be used for sports facilities, so the $364,000 is very small in terms of the monetary amount needed to actually start a CIP project for sports facilities. Chamorro Divisions is separately appropriated. We manage that at 513 with the appropriation level. Textbooks, as you heard the discussion, is 1.5 million. The Guam Department Education's alternative dispute is 40,000, and I just checked it. The 40,000 appropriation currently year to date, we haven't expended any of the 40,000 yet. The rest is the JRTC fund, summer school fund, and some of the other requirements that do not come with appropriations.
All right. If we deducted all of these mandatory allocations from your budget, or are any of these mandatory allocations also covered by what we just talked about, the salaries,
No.
the power, the water, the telephone, and the 10 million in critical contracts?
No, generally, like I said, the GAF funding and the general fund is what we use for personnel and ops. The special appropriations are derived per the Budget Act for specific allocations for services. So we align those with those activities. Only in the event that there's an overage or a shortage do we ever request for the superintendent's transfer authority to ensure that if there's any lapsed funds from any of the other revenue sources, that we're able to turn that into general ops and make sure that we continue our operations.
What about the
Primarily
allocations? Are you able to take those if you don't need them?
Depending, if it's like well, Healthy Futures funds, there's certain things that we can pull down. There's a trust fund that we cannot touch. That's limited from what we can remove, what we can access. And then in terms of like the textbooks, these are things that cash release is not provided until we actually have
What
an
about
expense.
the allocations for salary increases or merit bonuses or hygiene products or grounds maintenance?
So relative to like the salary increases, those fund the increments. We're generally keeping on top of that. That's appropriate funding level. For the merit bonuses, since we made current, I can tell you that the appropriation level is probably going to be higher than the continuous cost to make effective.
Yeah, so would you be able, with this language is allocated?
Yes.
You'd be able to take the balance and use it for something else?
Yes. So in the event that there's actual cash received, again, Senator, we're going to have to play that balancing act, and which is why the EFSC is important, because we're anticipating, and the question is if there's funds remaining as in a lapse, can we redirect? Funds only lapse when we have full actual collections of cash received. So we leave those line item appropriation and those balances open in the event that none of it is fully realized from GDOE. And I can tell you, like the textbook is something that we're not going to receive in terms of cash. And some of the other line items, if there's impact to cash collection from property tax, that's usually our biggest exposure to risk. That'll affect the collections under the GAF. So then in turn, we won't get the proper cash realization.
All right, so what you're saying is, despite us saying that it is allocated or shall be allocated, if you don't need it, you're still able to use it for other purposes?
In the event of...
That you receive the cash?
If we receive cash and there's an opportunity to reprogram at the end of the year, meaning to say we cannot underfund that menstrual and then not provide for a funding source and do that early.
Right.
So if the appropriation is for menstrual and you're 1 quarter into the year, you should not be reappropriating those funds that early to make sure that that thing's funded throughout the whole year, funding period.
All right. It's very disturbing, this list that was passed out of the D-Land tickets that DOE has requested since the typhoon in May. And there's only one or two that are closed. One is the assessment of schools with complete outage of power or partial it's a power assessment, that's closed. And removal of Typhoon malware debris, closed. Those two, that's it. The rest, the responses are either no response, open no response, they're asking for more information, or they were denied, unable to support. Electrical power restoration, master electrician to assess electrical damage to school infrastructure. The Guam National Guard said unable to support. GPA, DPW said not able to assist. That's the response that DOE is getting. And then the mold mitigation since June 13, pending procurement. It's actually maddening. It really is. It doesn't make any sense at all. All other, the director of Department of Administration testified earlier this week that all other agencies, they've been doing their typhoon mitigation because they were instructed to use all their existing budget and spend it on typhoon, and they were going to get reimbursed, or they were going to apply for reimbursement. I don't know how they did that without shorting themselves on their regular operations or their payroll or anything. I don't know how. But apparently, he said that's what they did, except for GDOE. GDOE was mandated to give up the $20 million that you had already budgeted for other purposes, including the small capital improvement projects that you described and other purposes of the $20 million. And that was from excess funds. So definitely, the cash should have been there. We appropriated it to GDOE, you received it, you budgeted it, how you would spend it, never received it, then the typhoon happened, and you needed to use it, and they still would not give it to you. And now, months later, they're not even signing off on the procurement for mold mitigation, of all things, while we are making teachers go into these schools. And Mr. Superintendent, you testified earlier last week or the other week that you were going to call the teachers all in. We need all hands on deck before we could even get this mold mitigation done. And that's not making any sense to me. Even the maintenance workers. I have family who are teachers. They're asking me, can we certify all of these school aides as certified carpenters and certified electricians, because they have been doing all the work. They've been carrying all this heavy load and doing all this stuff without any help from the master electricians, from any of the other agencies, or the National Guard. Skilled labor, pending procurement. General helpers, carpenters, welders, plumbers, pending procurement. Masons, pending procurement. Electrical power restoration, unable to support. Mission decline, vehicle assets and manpower to assist with moving schools identified for double session. Mission declined by the National Guard, still open.
Speaker, I'm sorry, your time is up, if
Thank
you don't mind.
Madam Chair, may I yield my time to the Speaker?
Yeah, we're going to go second round. I'd like to finish so that they can leave right after this, and we'll break for lunch. So we're going to go ahead for a second round. Senator Barnett, any questions?
Sure, I'd just like to continue on the train of thought that was started by the Speaker. Yeah, Soup, it is a little, well, it's a lot. Very frustrating that it seems like you guys have been hung out to dry and not getting the help you need, especially when you put in the request and it's clear to the body, and I think anybody who's been listening this morning, that you guys could have used the $20 million, right? So you mentioned you met with Charles Estevez last Friday. What was the general status of all of these many requests that you guys have put in?
It's my understanding that the mold mitigation contract and the fencing replacement contract They've solved the procurement issue. That was an internal personnel issue where someone was suspended and had to have a replacement that was authorized to make those commitments. I haven't seen the status of it as of today. The others we've been working with, we have a couple folks on our staff that are point of contact trying to push these things through, and you can see where they've gone, and we're still working on trying to get those accomplished.
What do you make of these facts that other agencies have been able to put in requests and get them addressed, and here you guys are at the back of the bus?
The most polite thing I can say is disappointed. It's a breakdown in the process, and it's not something that I have any control over.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
That's all I'm willing to say about it at this time. We're using everything we can get our hands on to solve these problems so that we have a safe place for everybody to work. And we've made a lot of progress on it. And it's, like I said before, it's been done mostly with support from our communities, all the different villages and the local folks, PTOs, mayors. Some of the companion military units that have adopted schools have also been heavily involved. But yeah, the things that were supposed to come through the government of Guam through this process, for the most part, been unfulfilled.
Have you discussed this with your deputies, and do you feel like your deputies, because you just pretty much got here, right? Did you feel like the appropriate legwork was done by your deputies, or is this something that they can point the finger back?
They've been working this issue nonstop. Absolutely. And it's also our board chair, Mary Okada, has been using her ability to connect with people and get things moving. It's been a slow and tedious process. And I won't pass judgment on it. I'm not going to get involved in that part of the process.
Well, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Sure is.
And it's not satisfactory. I agree.
Yeah. And I mean, we're a little more than a week away from opening schools, and I know that you had said in the first round that a lot of these images that are going around on social media, that's not how it is anymore. But I have to beg to differ, because I'm hearing from the schools that they're not getting the resources from downtown. I mean, I was just looking at a picture of a school that is the back door of the classroom is boarded up because we don't have a door, apparently. Right. So in what ways can we assist you with moving forward with a lot of these different requests that are kind of necessary?
We're using the additional authority you've given us on procurement. That's very helpful. We're able to move some things a little farther. When you were speaking, I was thinking, all right, there's another part of this, and it's absolutely slipped my mind at this point. But the work that we're trying to do, this is the priority I've given my folks, is because we know that we have the GW gym project finally approved and that contract is out, then the contracts are supposed to be out for mold mitigation and fencing. I need to see those folks on site doing the work. And so is our air conditioning contract has also been through the procurement process, and that work is supposed to start this week. Understanding that we have to replace 2,700 air conditioners. So it's a big project, but we have some facilities that, because of their construction, I have prioritized them to be first. For example, Tumuning Elementary School is one that doesn't have very many operable windows. It's a difficult facility to ventilate. That air conditioning has to come up sooner than other buildings that can be ventilated. So we're doing that kind of work right now. I would hope that during the course of this week, if not next week at the latest, we actually see workers on site exercising and executing these contracts.
So are there any of these requests that are, of the many requests that are still pending or remain otherwise unaddressed? At what point do you kind of throw in the towel and say, okay, never mind, this is just taking so long, let's go do it on our own? Or do you even have that ability?
Well, as to when do you throw in the towel, I don't know. That's we keep pushing on all fronts, but we met with the folks from our facilities and EPA folks that we're working through and working with, and we reviewed the projects and the costs of the projects that we have and prioritized them, and they were the mold mitigation began immediately, and then physical damage to school facilities, and then additional costs that we calculated that had to do with payroll and consultants and FEMA claims, all of that, and that's $20 million worth of work all by itself. The feedback that we have from our folks in the local government is that this is in process. Like I said, I haven't seen the work started yet. But we've been working with, what's the agency that he's from?
Homeland Security.
Yeah, Homeland Security is our point of contact.
Right.
And that, I think we discussed that, we've had that conversation already, and the feedback we're getting is now that the procurement and contracting issue has been solved, that these are going to move forward quickly.
And you're content with that?
I won't be content with it till I see it happening. And we're still looking, we've had some resources also come to us through the Army Reserve, not the National Guard, through the Army Reserve, through that command, and we're looking at setting up specific projects for that group to do. And this also through Homeland Security is the additional labor force, and we're trying to get those folks on the ground with our teams so that they can go and do this work. And we've been able to also provide additional materials for our folks to actually put, like the doors that are missing, those kinds of things.
So do you anticipate these efforts at the very least starting before August 23rd?
Yeah, I absolutely do. In fact, we're adjusting our manpower this week and next week. We still have inspections going on, but we've reduced the number of them. And it's from 3 down to 2, so that frees up more of our maintenance folks to be out working in the other buildings that are not being inspected, to bring them up to the standard that we're after.
Mr. Frank, with this budget proposal before you, because we know that you'd had a job fair to hire like facilities and maintenance personnel, can you share the results of that, and does this budget give you the ability to bring on more of those needed personnel?
The budget is presented with filled positions versus vacant positions. So in the filled positions, that's truly like our warm body costing, and you heard the senator and Senator tell us there, who looked at our $9 million average and estimate, right? So in addition to maintaining our current staffing levels at that rate, in order to fill all the other positions that have been approved, we estimate about a $14 million increase. So does the budget provide us the avenue to get all the much needed positions? Only if it's funding the vacant positions as well as the warm body. And we purposely split that up in our presentation to show that absent the additional support, we'll continue to maintain our current staffing levels until we get the appropriation level. In terms of the job fair, we do job fairs continuously throughout the years. How that relates and translates into us picking up some skilled laborers in our workforce, particularly for facilities and maintenance, we're still seeing that in small numbers. So I do know that we've made some hires. Last I checked, there was nothing over under 10. So there's not a significant influx of people running to work at DOE at those positions.
Right.
Higher than 6 or 7 people that I've seen so far.
So when you talk about the facilities and the maintenance division, just to give us a real picture of exactly what we're talking about, how many people are in that division that are responsible for all 41 schools?
Let me get the breakdown. I don't have that breakdown right now with me, sir, but I think it's, last I recall, we had openings and vacancies somewhere in the area of about 70, and we were not filled past 30-some employees. So there is 50% of the workforce, and the 70 was actually a decrease in what we, in terms, needed in terms of manpower, which is why the acting superintendent established and requested for the need of the 20 million to establish the public-private partnership. One was to build our internal workforce. I know we're under 40, we're just under that number. We do have vacant positions that'll get us past 70, but the 70 for 41 schools is not going to be sufficient. Therefore, the additional and the continuous appropriation need was to have a set-aside funding specifically for maintenance and specifically to address facilities' needs to include public-private partnership where we can hire and outsource some of those functions.
So in your opinion, in what ways could this body assist you with getting those needed personnel?
So one of the critical things, again, is funding those critical positions, but absent or in addition to funding that, is a dedicated funding source specifically for deferred maintenance. We've let our facilities go for decades without the proper funding. And you're seeing the decades long of improper funding towards our maintenance and us applying the right amount of resources to properly maintain this. So first, you're going to need the funding levels, we're going to need the people, and then we're going to need a plan that's fully funded to continue the services of the maintenance services for the schools. Right now, the current workforce is doing everything they can. I have to really just commend their efforts. With the limited workforce that we do have, they're going above and beyond their call of duty. So they're working at the school level daily to get us open, but they're not nearly the workforce that's adequate for the school district. So we do need funding to support the vacancies, and then outside of that, you're going to need additional funding support.
Do you have any figures, Mr. Frank?
In terms of the public-private partnership and that outsourced contracts, the estimation was about $10 million. And that's just to get that established and provide us with those maintenance. And again, the agreement there would be something that we combine our workforce with their workforce. And then in the instances of procurements, we treat it similar to like the lease agreements where the public-private partnership will allow them to go out and get emergency critical needs and make sure that we're having adequate resources for the men to complete the work timely.
And how far along are we with this PPP?
We've established it. We've done cost estimations. Again, in the original request, we were looking for a drawdown of funds to get it initiated. When we got word that the $20 million was coming our way, the immediate plans was to pivot towards half of that money going towards facilities and maintenance, skilled workers support. That gives us the ability to have an additional workforce, and that workforce comes with funding for supplies and materials.
So basically you had plans to initiate long-term ways to address the decades-long issues with facilities and maintenance in place with the $20 million that we appropriated, but then you got a big-time mullered because you never got the money.
Correct, and we went twice to see what we can do to push things forward. And again, like the superintendent said, we're working within the process. Obviously, if there's assistance that can be provided to the department and it's expeditious, we want to work with those agencies and to get that support. It comes time where we're not seeing the actions that are necessary from our standpoint. I think we're more than prepared, and he's more than prepared. He sat down in the meetings to make sure that we do get the funding that we need, and he's going to make that effort to ask for the body to give us that funding support.
There are recent media reports about issues relative to, and I'm not sure if it was just retention or recruitment of special ed teachers.
I'm not familiar with special ed recruitment. Did you have a specific?
Could you just, give us more info on that?
At this point, we're working with a partnership with UOG to try and work to certify more people in special education. We're also advertising off-island and also utilizing other, not special ed classroom teachers, but other service providers like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy in a remote setting because we don't have sufficient numbers of folks on island to provide the services that we need.
Mr. Superintendent, is this more of an issue with the University of Guam and maybe on their end not being able to meet the need, or is this something GDOE specific that we can assist with?
As I see it, it's a combination of the number of folks going into education in general and the desire to work in special education. It's an additional level of certification, and it's more complex. Not everyone is suited to it, but the program and the folks at the university have been cooperative and helpful, and we're trying to do a grow your own process too, with getting some of our parapros who are in special education certified as teachers. So there's multiple levels of effort going on here, but it's generally speaking, special education teachers across the country are in short supply.
So in your opinion, is there anything that we could add to this budget that could help you address those critical needs with special education?
That's one of our most critical ones. And in general, we're short teachers. We had well over 100 vacancies this year, and the response to that through job fairs and actual applicants has been about 50% of our need.
Mr. Cooper, Nurse, do you have any knowledge about AEDs and the cost? Because as you know, we passed a law this term that mandates placing of automated external defibrillators at all the GDOE campuses.
So what's the question specifically? I recall the law very
Right,
vaguely.
yeah.
So.
Well, I would like to give you money to buy the AEDs. So we're just kind of crunching our brains to figure out how much. Not the Cadillac ones.
I haven't seen the specific line item request, but I can go back and see what those costs will be. And obviously, if it's in our budget, then we're going to need the funding support for it. And if it's a push measure that's supported, then we'll just get you the costing, and hopefully it appears in our appropriations.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very welcome. Senator Parkinson? Okay. Senator Blas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cooper, Nurse, what was your funding levels last year?
Say again?
What was your funding levels last year?
So the request was 232.6 less the 12.5. So let me get you those exact figures. But the appropriation from the body was about 232 million. So about 220 last year.
220?
Correct.
What are your expenses going to be looking like by the end of this fiscal year?
So generally, and I apologize, the OPA is always on us because we're late with our audit, but generally the audit will show previous year's performance. Our expenditure level, again, there's the way that the books are combined in GDOE is you have a federal and a local. So the local side, we always, obviously we have to spend within our appropriation level, so we'll show a positive, but the positive will be because we did not expend on the textbook and funds that weren't released. So generally we're within $1 million of being overage in the appropriation levels. Anywhere from 1 to 3 million depending on the cash release and the funds that were not provided. So we basically go 95% of appropriation is expended during the year, and the small percentage that's not expended is because of cash release not available.
And what is the average? What were the last 3 years? What was your...
I would say whatever's the appropriation level is pretty much our expenditures, and there's some years in years past, not while I was the DFAD, but in some years there's over expenditure over appropriation.
Over expenditure of the appropriation. How were you able to capture that or
so we are able to capture that, and for those in years past, there's certain reasons of cash release. They stayed within the appropriation. There's an over expenditure because several factors that played into that performance year, carrying, again, outstanding obligations from the prior year, federal receivables or funds that were just not made available. But generally speaking, the department has been very good about staying within the appropriation levels as of late. Our books, we generally end with anywhere from $1 million to $3 million in the positive, because again, it's dependent on the funding authority that's not released. So appropriation authority will be there. Revenues received are a different story. Expenditures are based on revenues or appropriation level, but we also consider the shortage where the revenues are not realized. That should be the cost savings, or at least the positives that you're seeing in your end of year balance.
Okay. How would you see yourself at the end of this fiscal year? So about $1 million?
Yes. Again, we're in draft form, but we're going to operate in a manner. The way that the financials will read is the local appropriations, GDOE will continue to stay within its appropriation level. However, for this specific year, if you look at the local expense and then the federal side, we were able to use that federal leverage. So where their expenditures used to exist for power, utilities, and everything, and other critical contracts, you're seeing a higher expenditure category for those operational needs on the federal side and a lower level on the local side, which is the reason why we're able to stay within the appropriation level.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr.
Very welcome. Senator Lujan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple questions. Dr. Swanson, yourself and the board was just served with a lawsuit recently, asking for declaratory and injunctive relief. Would this be a big setback for the school opening? And again, your efforts into recruitment. We just heard earlier, of course, the recruitment challenges in specific areas, like in SPED and all that. And my understanding are these I think maybe one or maybe both students are SPED students whose parents filed the lawsuit. What do you foresee in regards to that lawsuit and the impediment or the setback that he has, maybe monetarily or school facilities, based on, again, the lack of providing adequate education services?
Oddly enough, Senator, we have not been served.
Oh, you haven't been served yet? Okay.
No, we have not accepted service. I haven't seen the details. The only thing I've seen is what's been in the PDN. It's great publicity, but it doesn't get down to answer the details of your question. The basic response that I have to do under any circumstances, first of all, we'll work with our legal counsel and look at the position and what the situations are. These are things that are ancient history that I get to solve. I do believe that in one instance, and this is something I cannot verify, but we were having a conversation with one of the families about going to mediation, and then they had agreed to that, and now here we are. So not having seen the documents, I can't really answer to any level of accuracy, but we will work on this. And are we looking at how we do special education? Yes. We've been working with my special education team since I got here on trying to overcome some of the past history, and we will continue to do that. As I said, though, just before, resources for special educators are limited in this environment, and it's a challenge. It's a tough one, but I don't know the specifics of these individuals, so I couldn't answer in any more detail than that.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was just wondering, because again, if you haven't been served, then you can't answer the rest of my questions. Being that you hadn't been served at this point, I'm just wondering if, again, such a situation will open the floodgates for more, again, lawsuits and injunctive relief and things of that nature. And
my only insight into that is that I know that the advocate who's handling it is passionate about what he does.
Sure. Okay. How, again, I think you'd, Mr. Gouverneur talked about, the challenges in recruitment as well. How is it still a great challenge? I understand it's not just a local challenge, but a national challenge in regard to SPED.
And yes, it is, and with the, and this is my personal opinion, with the advent of a whole new specialty in law schools of special ed lawsuits, it's becoming less and less attractive to be a special educator.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Very welcome, Senator Lujan. Senator Brown, any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did want to ask, you know, and certainly we had gone over this list a little earlier about where your pending assistance or assistance was declined, but of course we recognize that as a result of the typhoon, you know, Department of Education has had to put forth other resources to try and clean up and mitigate damages as a result of the typhoon. Where are you and where will you be with regards to any reimbursements or any federal reimbursements with regards to resources and efforts that have been put in place to mitigate damages to the school as a result of the storm?
We have been tracking our expenses in all the different categories with FEMA, met with them several times. Right now, at this point, the last numbers I saw at the end of last week was that we're looking at reimbursement at a level in between $13.5 and $14 million that in the category, I believe it's category Z, where that's the all time and labor and effort, that whole process. Plus, we're still working through the actual expenditures we have to make, but we've been working with FEMA all the way through this project, and those things have been being regularly submitted. So it's on track, but I don't have the actual numbers yet.
And what resources have been used by DOE to front those funds or the additional manpower resources that are being put in place or have been put in place to assist you in recovery efforts from the typhoon? I mean, recognize this is an additional unexpected on top of everything else, you know, in terms of
we're tracking
the
billing and the costs of the manpower that's been used in this process all the way back through and including shelter operations. And so our team is going through and breaking down all of those expenses. And then several of the things that we're doing with maintenance and recovery now, we're tracking all those dollars as well.
No, I understand that. I appreciate it. You very carefully outlined that. I'm inquiring, what is the source of the funding of those resources to address the recovery, being the man hours or any additional supplies, equipment, whatever it is you've needed or put in place to assist in the recovery from the storm? Where are those funds coming from in your budget?
So there's several things that were lined up that we greatly benefited as in process. So a lot of the immediate needs to get supplies and materials to the schools were already federally sourced. We were going through this process, so those funds and those procurements were already in the system. We utilized those. In terms of the manpower support, we have yet to pay the employees. We've got the billings. We're going through that process. The avenue for us to pay that is either currently using our internal transfer authority to make local funds available for reimbursement, or seeking, like we did, through the governor's office and waiting for that support. As you're aware, Senator, through the DLAN discussions, we have itemized, we have done our due diligence, we've collected the documentation, we're submitting for the support through the DLAN, and we're submitting for reimbursement and working with FEMA for what's allowed to be reimbursed. So we do have those in process. In terms of funding for payroll, that has yet to be released. In terms of supplies to the schools, we went through what we have already had in system. Any additional support will need a funding source.
And if and when those amounts are refunded, will they go back into those categories that they were taken from, the funding was taken? Would you go back and reinvest it back in those sections of your budget? Where would the reimbursement money go?
If the funding is reimbursed, then we take the funding as, again, if there's a front to the local side and we're able to get the reimbursements as we should be eligible for, then obviously it goes back into the general operations of the department, and the superintendent can make the line item discussion of where those funds will be appropriately used. If it's for personnel, then we can use it into personnel. If it's something that we move to cover facilities and maintenance, we can re-up those appropriations.
Okay, and as I had inquired earlier in the previous round, we were talking about the mold mitigation and the repair of your cyclone fencing around the schools, and I just want to clarify, do you or do you not have the funding for this?
We have not received any additional or direct funding to support those two line items. We put in the ticket for the DLAN support for those items.
And do you have an estimated cost of what you need for mold and what you will need for fencing repairs to the schools?
So the original mold abatement and remediation cost was estimated at $6.6 million. Since we've had a reduction in those estimates to go down to about $3.4 million. As far as replacement of damaged facilities and additional support, that's estimated at about $7.9 million.
You know, in the irony I have to point out, I mean, and you don't know if you're going to get any money transferred to you to pay for this, and yet the money that the legislature had appropriated for you to address maintenance, even prior to the storm, just regular maintenance, was taken away from you for other needs in the government. You know, talk about the irony of this whole situation. You're in need of these critical funds, and you could have used that $20 million to immediately, and maybe, I don't know, maybe that's a reason for the delay in the procurement. That's the most concerning thing. I mean, our colleagues, and we certainly recognize the critical need, especially for the mold mitigation, because it's a lot of concern that has been raised, and certainly, you know, for the safety of the children as well, the perimeter fencing to be, you know, installed. But it just seems very strange. I appreciate the fact you brought down that figure from 6.6 to 3.4. But the fact that this has not been addressed, which again, how many schools do you think this will slow down your ability to be able to get children back into the classroom as a result of not having the, you know, the mitigation for the mold addressed and the cyclone fencing? How much will that affect your ability for the children to go back into the schools?
With regard to the cyclone fencing, we're using a really old-fashioned approach, posting guards. Our ability to go back is curtailed to a degree, but we have 26 of our schools are ready to go back with the kids on a regular schedule in their home school. Some of them are in restricted areas and have parts of them cordoned off, but we have done the reevaluation of them, and they're ready to go. We have another set of schools that are going to double session. They're in the same situation with regard to cleanliness and preparation. We're satisfied that they're in good condition, but they're not where we want them to be yet. So the presence of, and then I have some schools, especially the 4 that are by the Jeff group, those buildings cannot be used at this time. They're behind in their work, and I've been on site and looked at those on Friday. They have a lot of work to do, so we're going to have some of those students will be double sessioned at another campus that is in decent condition. At the same time, we have more schools certified and given the permits by public health each week. So that's going along well. We're finalizing the actual information for the community to be out today about where things are, but knowing that as we continue the work, we're opening campuses back up so that students will be in their home school. That's where we want everybody. At the same time, we are sticking with the concept that we're not going to use online. We're going to be face-to-face in all circumstances, but I don't have the list with me because they're still polishing it up in my office right now. I say, yeah, here we are. We have 28 schools that are going to open with their student body on site, single session. And we have discussed and worked out the mechanics, and this is partly driven by bus schedules because DPW has limited resources, but that part has already been done. So we have 20 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, and 5 high schools that are going to open in their normal setting or in a shared. For example, John F. Kennedy and Simon Sanchez are sharing, but the other schools are on their own campus. And then we have some creative scheduling where we're taking the student body that's home to that school, but we're splitting it in half and they're going double sessions. So half the kids are coming in the morning, half in the afternoon. And then we have 4 different schools that are going to have to go alternate days. So we're working with those communities and those families so that they have that information. That's what's coming out today. But we'll have everybody back to school on the 23rd face-to-face unless there's something that we haven't seen yet emerges to change that. But that's the effort that's going forward at this time.
Well, we certainly appreciate the update. I think the public does as well. I mean, this is, you know, larger numbers than where we were looking at just a couple of weeks ago. So I think your efforts
there's been a great deal of progress
need to be
made in that time.
recognized. I mean, that's one of the reasons, even though we understand some of our colleagues had reservations. I mean, our priority was to open the schools, and as you are, and your priority is, and also making sure we get as many children educated and in the classroom, getting the direct learning that you're talking about. We really appreciate. I know it's hard. It's on top of just your regular responsibilities. But I also just need to get back to, with my remaining time, I really want to clarify, is the issue of limitation and getting this procurement completed personnel related or funding related, or is it a combination of both? I mean, is this something that you're anticipating is going to happen, or is this just a wait and see, and maybe if you get assistance from the administration, maybe it'll happen?
The challenges are both personnel and funding, because one goes with the other. But the process that we've been going through, we could have done faster, especially if we had more maintenance folks, and the money. And the frustrating piece for me is that depending on where the money has to flow through, there are different levels of bureaucracy that constrict that process. So as Mr. Cooper Nusha said, we're looking at this public-private partnerships, because a contractor who has a decent line of credit and his business is healthy can go in, and if he needs to buy $700,000 worth of materials, he can order them, get them on a boat, and get them here. We have to wait. For an example, we have several projects that are held up in the Attorney General's office, and we had to get a special attorney just in that group to monitor our procurements, to get them processed and out to buyers to get the job done. So and the work that you did to give us the emergency procurement capacity to go up to $250,000 has been a great assistance, but we needed that 6 months ago to get where this body wanted our schools to be at the opening of school. That needed to start a lot farther back, and it's partly our own bandwidth, our own capacity to handle resources and move forward with all of our resources. So it's a combination of things, and one of my objectives is to streamline and clean up those processes so that we can, because this isn't going to go away when we solve this problem. We'll have more that come just because we have lots of facilities, lots of people, and money involved. So we have to take a look at that, but that's another day. Right now, I want to get kids in school and want parents to understand where their kids are, how they are, and that everybody is doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Well, it's just something to note. I mean, with the figures you provided, you're talking a little over $11+ million that is needed just to address the mold mitigation, even with the reduced amounts. Right. To include also the fencing issue, which I'm sure is a priority for you.
It is a priority. I am trusting that money is still resident in the fund that was set aside with the governor, and working through Homeland Security, that it's accessed and the contractors are out doing the job. I understand the people who have bid on it are qualified, highly qualified to do that, and they have EPA certification to do that work. And I know that once that gets done, that will give a higher level of confidence to our whole community.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Vice Speaker? Yeah, nothing. Senator Shelton? Nothing. Okay. So the last one, I have no questions. So Senate Speaker, you'll be the last to close on the second round, and then we'll break for lunch and come back and start with the third round for amendments. Speaker Terlahi, you're up.
Sure, thanks. And yeah, I'm still trying to get it, understand. Because I have to explain this to people out there every single day. what's happening with DOE, how come, and I always have to go back to, they haven't even got their mold mitigation yet. And I don't know, I feel like what do the people of Guam have to do to get mold mitigation after a typhoon? Why has it been sitting since June? That makes no sense. No wonder why the mayor was so upset when he came in here originally, because that's the same thing that happened with them. They weren't getting their money. They weren't getting any help. But this is mold mitigation. I mean, this is like a basic. Mr. Superintendent, you've been given the authority to open schools now, despite not having a sanitary permit. Are you going to open them without the mold mitigation, any of the schools?
We have several, and I've been saying at this time, 4 campuses that we will not open at this point, because they're, even with the efforts of the folks who are there to try and mitigate the mold, they've not been able to move that to a point that's satisfactory. The other schools that, and I will be out looking at them myself today and tomorrow, to be sure that they're to the point where we feel that they have done a credible job. At the same time, we want to bring this contract into place, but we have done a tremendous amount of work to clean them thoroughly inside and out. Are they certified by EPA as having the job complete yet? No, they're not, because the contractor has not been authorized to go to work.
Well, do you believe, you're telling me that only 4 schools need mold mitigation and the rest are okay? So does that mean that this is a waste of our time waiting for this mold mitigation, or our money to be used for mold mitigation, if you guys are able to do that yourself?
There are segments of several of the schools that are off limits, that are not going to be used until this work is complete. So no, it's a lot more than 4. But there's more, I mean, in our headquarters building, we have mold issues in there at the same time.
Right, but you're using the building, right? Is that what's going to happen in the schools? I guess my question is, maybe, I'm just trying to figure out again, why would they wait on mold mitigation? I don't care what kind of procurement personnel issue they're having up there. This is is it only DOE's DLAN tickets that got stuck in the Typhoon process, or was it every single government agency's DLAN ticket got stuck in the Typhoon process because of a personnel issue? That's insane. So I want to know, maybe they're getting the impression that mold mitigation's just not that essential. And that's what I want to clear up here is it? Are we opening the schools without the mold mitigation because we've done a good job with our in-house in clearing the mold? That's possible, perhaps. I don't know enough about it. What are you trying to tell us? That for some schools, yes, that's what's going to happen? And that's why I'm asking. So then, should we just disregard all these DLAN requests? These are not that essential in your opinion, or are they essential? Like necessary, like you said 6 months ago, yet we're opening schools in a week.
No, those services are still essential. Where we have done a tremendous amount of work to eliminate mold as many places as we can. We've closed off parts of our campuses that we feel are not ready. And we have to get that service accomplished across all of our facilities. And then we have to look at the follow-on, because we live in the climate we live in, that we have a continuing process for this. Mold is not something that's simple to eradicate. I want that final contract to be put through and executed across all of our facilities.
So if you get it, it might help you to open additional wings, additional classrooms, additional facilities. If you get it before.
Yeah, yes, the sooner we have it, the better.
I don't know.
Because like I said, I have 4 campuses that cannot open. And then...
I just hope the parents are hearing this, because it's really, if I'm them, I mean, I am them, and I am angry. It doesn't make any sense. If they're asked to bring in supplies, to send their kids to potentially unsafe schools, while we sit around and just not sign the contract for mold mitigation because we have some kind of other issue up there. It doesn't make any sense. This is a typhoon issue, and the typhoon happened in May. Anyways, I'm going to move on, Madam Chair, to, it just seems to me, based on what we've heard, the DOE is underfunded, that they're going to have issues, and if they are underfunded, so what can give? One of my colleagues asked, can you do some more cost savings? And they said perhaps in future fiscal years, if we plan enough, we might be able to reduce some schools and rearrange that. That's a cost-saving measure, but we're pretty tight right now with existing employees and the budget that we're giving you, and with existing utilities. So what happens if you don't pay your power? Can that be a way that you can juggle your budget? I'm going to ask you, Frank, because you've been there longer. What has been your experience of GPA and GWA? Maybe we could just hold off on those for a little while you float the rest of your needs, like special ed teachers and filling up those positions that are not funded in here.
Was the question to run a float and not pay our bill? No, that's I can't do that. Certainly wouldn't do that to the power. The power agency will not support that or tolerate that. We've been cut in years past for non-payment. Do you really want a power bill that's
Have you?
Yes.
That's what I'm asking.
Yes. So we've worked a relationship to where we're in better standing with GPA. They do have a process for demand and pay. They treat us as a customer because it'll be biased if they don't treat us as like they treat their other customers. So GDOE is the largest customer outside, I guess, the military from GPA. Their business or their organization, their government agency is contingent upon their cash receipts. Mm-hmm. And as one of the largest customers, if not the largest customers, they're going to hold us to that. I've already had several meetings. I've worked with people in their agency to make sure that we are timely in the payment. So we don't not get to pay our power bill because it's a government-to-government arrangement. We don't not get the benefit of delaying payment. They have bond covenants that will be jeopardized if their payments aren't received. So I get that and I understand that, and the appropriation levels, which is one of the reasons why we fast-tracked that payment with the utilization of federal leverage. So absent the appropriate funding, if the question is what are we gonna do if we do not pay our power bill, and the answer is simple: we're going to have a reduction in our services, or they'll cut certain campuses.
I'm not advocating that. I'm just asking the reality of the FY2024, if you had to juggle. So I'm looking at the options. So you've given us that this budget funds salaries, and I don't think you can juggle those for filled positions, and you said it funds filled positions at $234 million, right? And if you want to fill any additional, you need more.
Correct, but again, I qualify the 234 because the $9 million average includes a federal reimbursement of about $1 million, and that $1 million will go back into general ops. Again, the timeline of the cash receipts is important to note there because if the cash receipts goes through any delayed process, that cash is sitting in a receivable for me. So again, the idea is that we have the appropriate funding to continue our filled positions, our warm body costing, and then the baseline operations, which includes power, utility, data services, and critical contracts. That's the baseline figures that we presented.
Right, and this budget is short on the baseline figures.
Correct. So the appropriation level provided in this right now will pose significant problems for GDOE, and we'll get into that juggling act if it's passed of what gives.
Yeah. I was very happy when I first saw the budget because it's more than last year's budget by a significant amount. But you're saying it's still 30 million short.
Yeah, and
that's a lot of money. I don't know where we're going to juggle that, but.
And last year it was short as well, but we were able to again
use it with federal funds.
And and those funds have expiration dates.
Yes, and we're And so it's either we're going to use the Fed funds again for salaries or something, or you're going to continue to use them on the CIP projects that they've been assigned to at this point. And that's the choice we're giving
That's
DOE if
the
we go
choice
forward
that-
with this amount.
Underfunding the local side of the budget request that we're asking if we have to, and I don't think that's even something our superintendent will have to approve, US Ed will have to approve, is if there's a shortage, then you're placed in a predicament is, again, you cut costs, and if you have to dip into another funding source, is it even available? Because right now, I can tell you that in our CIP, we were very successful in the scope of work, and there's a high priority in getting these things done. Right now, there's upwards of $110 million in the process right now. Requisition, conversions, we have some small contracts, and we're going to start here with the significant contracts. So once those are obligated and encumbered, we're not turning back. That procurement will be out, and that money would be obligated.
It's not even possible.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want you to get your special ed teachers. I think we need to work on that from all levels. But I also think you should be getting the support that you say you are getting, but it doesn't look to me like you are actually getting the support that you need to get these schools open on time. And yeah, so I think we just have to try to do what we can with money, but look what happened. When we give you money and it goes away, it's just a cycle of, I don't know, really sending the wrong message to our students and our parents of how dedicated we are. And I'm not blaming the legislature in this part. I'm actually going to place the blame on the administration for a large part, because while they want to try to wash their hands, they control these DLAN tickets, they control GSA, they control whether the Army Guard or the National Guard is going to get out there and help and people. They control whether we're going to move this funds back to where it was originally appropriated. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That concludes our second round, and we're going to excuse the panel for the rest of the day so you don't have to come back. That's why we went through lunch. Sorry about that, but we know you're very busy. So we will return on the third round with amendments in this chapter at around 2:30. So we will return at 2:30. So we'll recess for now.